Police officers of Reddit, what was the scariest thing you've encountered? I live in a small quiet town of roughly 2,000 people, and usually take the night shift because it's much easier than dealing with old people constantly calling 911 over petty things. It's also worth mentioning that the opiate epidemic has started to become a problem in our area, and people have been getting nastier lately. I've responded to some crazy situations, such as a high 20-something-year-old woman screaming and rolling around in her own shit in McDick's, but nothing will top this call. I was responding to a call about 20 minutes away from town that was supposedly a break-in, but the person on the phone wasn't making much sense and probably was mentally ill/high/etc. and was warned to be cautious when entering the home. I pull up to this house that is just off one of the main highways that run through our county, and it is really run down. Roof is sagging, all the lights are out, moss and vines growing everywhere. You get the picture. Some kind of Halloween crack house. No car in the driveway, which is odd because you need a car to get anywhere since it took 20 minutes to get to town. I knock on the door and announce who I am and why I was there. No response. I twisted the door handle and sure enough, it was unlocked. With a hand on my gun and my flashlight out, I entered the house. It smelled awful. I can only describe the smell as burning garbage and cat piss. It's pitch black, dairy dirt, bits of food wrappers, and empty pop cans all over the floor. The foyer was dirty, but the living room was a disaster. Piles of garbage and God knows what that are at least 4 feet high take up most of what I assumed was a living room at one point. The smell made my eyes water and burn, and I fought not to gag. The foyer was connected to the living room, then there was a hallway on the left, and a staircase on the right. I heard shuffling noises coming from the kitchen, so I headed that way. I called out again, announcing who I am and why I was there, and a friendly reminder that cops carry guns. I will admit, I was starting to sweat a little. As I entered the kitchen, there seemed to be no one there, and thankfully, no more piles of rotting garbage. There was a countertop that covered the corner of the wall, and somehow was spotless compared to the rest of the dirt and garbage-filled house, but did have a few objects on it. There was a perfectly clean plate, fork, and knife all set up as if someone was about to sit down and eat a meal, and a single piece of paper on the plate. It read "Op should have put a serious tag on this." Was called to a one-vehicle accident in the middle of nowhere late one night. Come upon a car that had rolled over, but wound up upright. It had been driven some distance after that and then abandoned. Miles from anywhere, no one around, and a freshly stuffed car. I had to inventory the vehicle and investigate the accident/ID the driver. I'm all lit up so that anyone driving down that road wouldn't hit me, but I'm pretty much as tactically vulnerable as it's possible to be because, due to the lights, I can't see shit going on more than 20 yards to either side. That was a long 45 minutes waiting for the tow truck, just me and the crickets and God only knows who or what staring back at me from the cover of darkness in the tall grass. No other cars ever did come along. Not a cop, but I have a friend who is. Most of his stories are shocking to hear, from picking up pieces of a person on train tracks to having a stab wound from a crackhead, but one that always stuck with me was when he had been called to a possible suicide from a fellow police officer he had worked with. Now apparently she had been on stress leave because the job had just been getting to her. There was an incident she had attended that pushed her over the edge. Anyway, he shows up to her house to find that she had climbed inside of a wheelie bin, trash bin, big enough for a person to fit in, and shot herself through the mouth. Obviously, being in the force herself, she got in the bin, so there was minimal cleanup for the officers who found her. I'm not an officer, but I work with a guy who recently left the force for a less stressful job, and he has shared a number of his experiences and every one of them is undeniably intriguing. He's a younger guy, but from his stories you think he'd been doing it for decades. Nonsensical calls about the neighbor's cat to car chases and homicides, but if there is one thing that obviously strikes a nerve with him, it is every time he had to subdue someone who had taken bath salts, which has been more than a few times. In one story, he mentioned that after cuffing a man who was blitzed off bath salts, he started wigging out because he thought spiders were crawling all over him. The man's way of coping with this was to start biting large chunks out of forearms, repeatedly and without hesitation. The other one I can remember is getting a call about a crazed man. He said they showed up on site and there was a 6 feet 5 inches plus 300-pound man built like NFL defensive lineman that had taken bath salts. My colleague said he was tased 3 times with supplemental help from a few billy sticks before he went down. He went unconscious, so the crew was able to cuff him and strap him down in the back of an ambulance to be transported for medical help. Halfway back to the hospital, the dude comes back to and manages to get out of being strapped down. Luckily, the two officers were able to tighten him back down before things got too chaotic. But yeah, bath salts, apparently it really turns people into zombies. I worked for a small town, a little less than 2,000. We're out in the country and only have one officer on at a time, so I'm on my own for the most part. Sheriff deputies will come back me up if a serious call comes out or I radio for assistance. The deputies are out patrolling the county and are usually 15 to 20 minutes away going lights and sirens, so I have to account for that in any situation I find myself in. I'm on my own for at least 15 minutes. On a fall night around 2 a.m., a call comes out for a check welfare a few miles outside of town. A woman had called dispatch asking us to check on her ex-husband because he hadn't been acting himself lately, and she was concerned. Being that this call is outside my city, it is technically a sheriff call to handle, but since it's only a few miles away and deputies were a ways out, I didn't mind taking it with them. I head over to the house and put together a plan in my head of what I will say and how this will play out during my short drive. Calls like this are pretty routine and end with me determining that the person is physically and mentally okay, or me determining that the person is hurt or a danger to themselves or others and needs to go to the hospital. If my silver tongue can't convince them to go on their own free will, I have to force them. Silver tongue hasn't failed me yet though. I pull up to the house. The place is surrounded by dense woods and has about a quarter-mile driveway. I can see a light on in the front bay window. I get out of my squad, walk up to the front door, and give it a few normal knocks. No answer. Give it a few harder knocks. Still no answer. I radio dispatch and tell them I am not getting an answer at the door. I ask them to check our system for a phone number and try giving him a call and ask him to come to the door. Dispatch tells me they already have him on the line. 20 seconds later, dispatch radios that he called in and told them I better leave because he's sitting in the woods with his shotgun aimed at me as we speak. My head shot up looking out into the pitch black trees and I slowly walked back to my squad. I was oddly calm until the last few steps before reaching my squad when I felt the panic of someone running up behind you. I jumped in my squad and pinned it out of there. And for the record, from what I could see after getting in my squad, there was no one running up behind me. Several hours later he gave himself up without anyone getting hurt. About 9 years ago we get a call from a payphone. There's a dead body in the abandoned building at corner 1st and Main. Street names made up for this story. An officer responds to the area and can't find anything that would be considered an abandoned building. The caller hung up without leaving any information. And the payphone that he called from was several miles from that area, so the officer clears out the call having no contact. The next day we get another phone call from another payphone. There's a dead body inside the abandoned building at the corner of 1st and Main. Again they hang up without offering any other information. This time I get dispatched the report. I head up to the area of that intersection and start looking around. Now understand that I live and work in a fairly sizable metropolitan area, and this was when the economy was still good. Booming even. Abandoned buildings were hard to come by at that time. I drive through all the shopping plazas and little industrial complexes within the vicinity of that intersection and I can't come up with anything, so I start driving a little bit further in each direction. But I remember that there's some new construction that hasn't been finished yet. And I wonder if they think that those are considered abandoned. I get out of my car and walk through a bunch of businesses that are still in the framing stages. But I can't find anything. As I leave the area I'm now more than a mile from the original call location. As I pull out onto the major roadway I stop for traffic and look in front of me. There it is. A gigantic electrical component factory that has been vacant for probably the last 15 years. It has a 9-foot wall around the entire perimeter and the landscaping is still maintained. So it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb right away. That added to the fact that I'm pretty far away from where the color said it should be. But then again, it's abandoned. It's definitely abandoned and has been for a very long time. So I call for another unit to back me up and we go check it out. We use a drainage pipe to climb up and over the 9-foot wall to get inside the perimeter. We start walking the building, checking every single door. When I say this place is big, I mean it's huge. It's over 100,000 feet squared. It's like an old abandoned Motorola, or Freescale, or Intel type building. It has gigantic coolers on the outside, pipes running all over which way, ductwork running down the sides of the buildings, loading docks, and a basement. Every door we come across is locked and secured. We continue walking around looking for anything out of place. As I get about 3/4 of the way around the building, I pull on a door and it flings open. I called my backup, who comes over to me. We knock, announce, and enter the building. As we step into a hallway that leads about 100 yards down with doors on either side, the door we just stepped into closes. And it's black. Pitch black. Like can't see my nose on my face black. We start moving through the building, trying to clear each room as the best of the two of us can. But this place is absolutely gigantic and each room is connected to what seems like 4 other rooms. We stepped into one room and the door closes behind us. It must have been some old clean room or something. It was the weirdest thing because there was no sound. Nothing. I couldn't hear the traffic outside, or the grumble of electricity or air moving. All the sounds that we heard throughout the rest of the building were gone in this one room. When I spoke to my partner, our voices didn't even echo. It must have had some kind of sound-canceling insulation or something. But it freaked me out. The floor had random 12-inch holes in it, that led down to a basement that was flooded by over 6 feet of water. Wire, ceiling panels, and wire jacketing were hanging from the ceiling. There was broken glass, broken pieces of metal and brick, holes in the drywall, and abandoned equipment all over. I clearly remember thinking to myself that if there were ever a time that I would be attacked by skinless zombie dogs, this would be it. And the entire time we were trying to find a dead body. As though this shit wasn't freaky enough, I'm actively looking for a dead guy. We end up moving through the building, clearing it as best we can until we get to what was definitely the industrial part of the building. Gigantic boilers, evaporative coolers, and components that run the building. Oh, and spiders. A shit ton of spiders. We stepped into a room and find that it is a dead end. We've reached the end of the building and we don't have any further to go. The room is about 20 by 30, and contains 5 very large electrical cabinets. They are about 8 feet tall, and each about 4 feet wide, sitting next to each other. And they look exactly how I would design the lab of an evil genius if I had to make a sci-fi movie. The entire thing was covered in dials, levers, and red and green buttons. But only the panel in the middle was still illuminated. It had one steady glowing red light on it. The first and only light I saw in that entire building. My partner calls out to me, "You got anything?" I replied, "No. Nothing in here. Looks like this was a gigantic waste of time. Just let me take a look behind these cabinets and we'll be good to head back to our cars." The panels have about 18 to 24 inches of room on each end between them and the wall behind them. I walk over to the left side and peek my head around, and bam, there he is. A dead guy on the ground, pinned between the wall and the cabinet. He's on his back, arms in front of his chest like a T-Rex, and he has some injuries. And I nearly shot him. Not gonna lie. He scared the living shit out of me. Even though I spent the last hour actively looking for him, I still wasn't completely ready for it, so skip ahead to calling detectives etc. At the time, stripping copper was fairly new, at least to our area. I didn't recognize what the wire jacketing meant, as I hadn't seen it before. These two knuckleheads in breaking into this abandoned factory for God knows how long and systematically stripping every piece of metal out of it. And they made it all the way to the very last room, the only room that still had power running to it. See, the middle panel. You controlled the fire suppression system for the building. And the owner's insurance policy required that it remained on active. When these guys opened up the panels, they must have thought they hit the mother lode. Each one contained 1.5 inch copper cable. Now 1.5 inch copper cable is worth quite a bit of money, but it also conducts quite a bit of electricity. They cut through the first one successfully, leaving the sharp ends exposed inside the cabinet. But when this poor sap started cutting into the second one, he got the ride of his lifetime. Not only did he electrocute himself, but the current coursing through his arms pulled him into the cabinet, stabbing one of the exposed ends of the previous cable into his chest. This kills the copper thief. Working midnights, my sergeant and I got dispatched to assist a neighboring police agency locate a suicidal subject. The man was reportedly armed with a handgun and sent a suicidal text message to his wife from his phone, which was pinging to his place of employment in our city. The accuracy of the ping was +/300 feet. We show up at his place of employment, which consists of multiple buildings in a business district. We locate his car backed up next to a door to their administrative building. Car hood was still warm, keys and phone tossed in the driver's seat. Check the door to the building. Unlocked. 2-story building, maybe 10,000 square per foot of single offices, bathrooms, closets, versus 2 officers with hand cannons. Lots of places for this armed fella to be hiding. With a pucker factor 10 we clear this dark, quiet building, calling out this guy's name hoping he would answer. But the more we called out, the louder the silence grew, the more stressed things became. Cleared the building, no contact. Checked a couple other buildings on the property, no contact. Next to these buildings is an open field with chest-high grass, overgrown, but easy to walk through. In the dark, guns and flashlights drawn, we tactfully and carefully checked the field, calling out for this guy, but still had no contact. Can't find him anywhere. We return to the administrative building and notice a RV parked on the back side of the building. We go back to check, and as I look under the RV, I see him laying on his side, arms awkwardly above his head. And he is looking directly at me. But something is off. We are making eye contact, but it's a one-way non-verbal conversation. We move in, guns drawn, yelling commands, very chaotic, all that, and the dude had taken his own life before we even got the call to go look for him. But I will never forget those 2 hours of looking in dark rooms and chest-high grass, calling out to him, and the deafening silence. And I definitely won't forget that one-way conversation we had when I found him and looked him in the eyes. Not sure if this counts, but this happened to an old family friend. My cousin was friends with 2 twin brothers who could have pretty much gone on to do anything. These 2 guys honestly could have been actors or models, they looked the part. Instead they chose to be cops. One of them in his rookie year got called to a robbery in progress. He and his partner made it inside the house that was being robbed when they noticed that one of the robbers was inside and he was armed. Our friend pulled out his gun, shot and killed the guy with a clean first shot. He had been a cop maybe 4 months. He ended up getting the mandatory time off, but really after about 2 years he quit and now he's a parole officer. I'm not a cop, but I once spoke to one at a job fair and he told me a crazy story because I noticed a scar on his arm that was clearly a bite from a human. Apparently he was attempting to subdue some dude acting crazy, kneeling on his back trying to get him in cuffs. While he was still on top of him, the guy started doing push-ups with one arm. Then the guy yelled, "I'm gonna eat you," threw the officer off him, and bit him on the arm. Turned out the guy was on PCP. I was a cable installer for Comcast. Off topic, I once entered a home through the front door off the street, entering a large empty room with 7 doors, all with locking knobs. There was no furniture in this room but a lone TV, and while I was there, a small boy opened one of the doors. He looked dirty, and abused. He talked to the adult standing next to me, and quickly shut the door and locked it. I had a very bad feeling about this house, but without any proof, there was nothing I could do. It completely creeped me out and was a bit scary. The other thing was I was delivering pizzas in the late 90s, when VHS machines were big, and I delivered to a large apartment where the front door opens to the whole apartment. I could see a giant room, long, like the first floor of a small row house. On the far end was a mattress on the floor, trash everywhere, 2 very dirty children with dirty clothes on, and on the right there was 2x4s nailed to the wall with hundreds of VHS tapes with white covers on them, and a video camera set up. The guy got one a large pizza for the family, and I got out of there as fast as possible. Now, I was also an EMT, and I saw a good bit of blood and puke and drunks and stuff like that, but these 2 I just mentioned actually scared me a good deal. I can still picture both rooms vividly in my mind. I think you sometimes feel that something isn't right. Something is very abnormal about the setup when you are there. It's like a sixth sense. I was very happy to leave both being a cable guy and also EMT. You just see things that you wish you didn't. My dad is an officer and he told me a story that I thought was pretty creepy. One time he got asked to do a shift in this sort of private prison in London. It was in the same place as loads of other buildings and therefore seemed to blend in as just a regular place. Turns out this prison only had one man. This one guy was kept in a cell made of plexiglass or something. There was a little tray thing that went in and out, which they used to give him food, water, as well as knives. As they let him prep his own food. It was sort of designed so that if you're putting things in, he can't reach through, so there was never any direct contact with this guy. He always had to give his knives back too. My dad said that when he went there he had to be let in cause the place is always locked and you have to be let in from the inside, and there is always 2 officers inside for these exact responsibilities, and only ever 2. Whenever my dad asks anyone in the force about said prison/prisoner, No one's heard of it, and he's never found out who the hell this guy was who was seemingly so dangerous that he was a lone prisoner, never had interaction with officers or released from his cell. Been shot at, stabbed, attacked with an iron bar, had a filing cabinet thrown at me from an office block. London riots. Scariest things were running towards gunshots, and running towards an explosion. 100% knew I was going to die at both of those, still gives me shivers. My high school coach was an ex-cop who ran sting/raid operations in an area known for Latino gangs and drugs. He said that he opened a drawer in a shed one time and found 2 massive pipe bombs. Told me that his heart nearly jumped out of his throat. I heard a great one on a YouTube channel about a cop patrolling some random rural road surrounded by trees when he spotted someone running across the road up ahead of him. He pulled over and turned on his cruiser spotlight to see them standing in the trees wearing a mask. He stepped out and asked him/her some questions but got no response. Then several more people appeared from every direction, practically surrounding him, all wearing masks and carrying what looked like very large knives. He drew his gun and kind of turned around, pointing it towards all of them. Then one of the masked dudes spoke and simply said, "Go away." He got in his car and took off, radioed for backup and went back out there with several other officers, but the people were gone. He believes he stumbled onto some sick group of people planning some disturbing activities to anyone driving by. But when they saw he was a cop they weren't sure about proceeding. I'll have to find that video, it's a good one. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.